Imagine standing in a steel compartment where the air is 35 degrees Celsius, where you have had ear defenders on since you came down the ladder, and where the deck under your boots slams and shudders every 45 seconds as thousands of tons of ship rides up onto the ice and breaks it with its own weight. Now put your hand flat against the outboard bulkhead. On the other side of that steel, a few centimeters away, it is minus 40. That is the world an icebreaker's engineer lives in. A machine that has to stay hot, wrapped inside a hull that the air and the ocean are both actively trying to freeze solid. And here is the part that surprises people. The thing most likely to stop that ship is not the ice in front of the bow. It is the ice getting drawn into the hole in the bottom of the hull that the engines drink from. So how do you keep a power plant alive in that? That is exactly what we are going to find out today. Hi, my name is Jack, and this is Life at Sea, the channel where we go inside the lives of the people who live and work on the water. The ship we are talking about today is not a cargo vessel that occasionally meets ice on a winter run into the Baltic. It is not a cruise ship doing a summer season in Alaska. The ship we are talking about is a purpose-built icebreaker, a vessel whose entire reason for existing is the condition every other ship on Earth is trying to avoid. And inside that ship, we are going to spend almost all of our time in one department, down below, with the people who never appear in the photographs. Because when you watch footage of an icebreaker, you are watching the bow. The actual story is in the engine room. What an icebreaker's engine room is actually up against. Let us start with the number, because it is not a figure someone made up for a documentary. Under the International Maritime Organization's Polar Code, a ship intended to operate in low air temperature has to be assigned a polar service temperature, and that figure must be set at least 10 degrees colder than the lowest mean daily low temperature for the area and season it will work. So a vessel working water where the coldest average daily low sits around minus 30 gets certified, equipped, and structurally specified for minus 40. It is printed on the ship's Polar Ship Certificate. Every system on board is supposed to still function at it. Now hold that against what is happening inside the hull. A running diesel-electric plant is a furnace. Hot oil, hot water, hot exhaust, and every single pipe, valve, vent, and drain that crosses from that furnace to the outside world crosses a temperature difference of 70 or 80 degrees in the space of a few meters of steel. Fire main, deck steam, overboard discharges, hydraulic lines to the deck machinery. Any one of them, left with water sitting in it and no flow, becomes a burst pipe by the morning watch. Then there is the seawater problem, and this is the one that genuinely keeps ice-going engineers honest. Ships cool their engines with the ocean. Seawater comes in through a recess in the hull called a sea chest, gets pumped through coolers, takes the heat away, and goes back over the side. In polar and subarctic water, that intake fills with fragile ice, a slush of tiny suspended crystals that packs into the strainers and chokes the flow. If it is not cleared quickly, the engines overheat. Read that back and let it sit for a second. A ship surrounded by an entire ocean of frozen water can lose propulsion because it cannot get enough water inside itself. And all of this is happening while the ship is being physically beaten. Icebreaking in heavy conditions is not a steady transit. It is backing and ramming, astern and ahead over and over, sometimes for hours and occasionally for days. People who have done it describe being thrown forward roughly every 45 seconds when the ice stops the ship and the vibration is transmitted through the entire hull, so there is nowhere on board to escape it. From inside the accommodation, you get shaking bookshelves and the slow destruction of anything not properly secured. The machinery takes worse. One American patent covering heavy-duty icebreaker shafting describes ice milling loads of up to 1,000,000 pounds flexing the propeller shaft, enough to fail the anti-rotation bar on the shaft enclosure and stop the ship for around 8 hours of repair. And you are doing that a long way from help. The Polar Code assumes remoteness as a baseline design condition, requiring survival provisioning for a minimum of 5 days. Ask any engineer who has stood a watch in heavy ice, and they will tell you the same thing. Out there, you are not waiting for the repair yard. You are the repair yard. So, how does anyone keep this working? It comes down to 3 systems, and none of them are glamorous. The seawater that has to keep flowing. The core trick is beautifully simple. You use the engine's own waste heat to stop the ocean freezing into the engine's own intake. Ice-going ships are fitted with recirculation arrangements that divert warm, cooling water discharge back into the sea inlet boxes, raising the temperature enough that Frazel never gets a foothold. Crews will keep the overboard discharge valves nearly closed to hold heat in the system, run the low suction rather than the high one to reduce the chance of a blockage, and watch pump pressures obsessively, because a falling suction pressure is the first sign that something is packing up down there. When prevention fails, you go to the blunt instruments. Sea chests on ice-going vessels are fitted with steam connections so the crew can inject low-pressure steam straight into the strainer plates and melt the blockage out. Compressed air does the same job, and there are contingency line-ups drilled in advance that let the ship draw cooling water out of a ballast tank instead of the sea if the chest is genuinely gone. Honestly, that whole design philosophy is clever in a way I did not expect before I looked into it. The catch is that this is all maintenance, not magic. The steam blow-off valve on the sea chest is used very rarely, only in genuinely extreme cold, which is precisely why, on a lot of ships, that 3-way recirculating valve gets neglected and is found seized solid the one day it matters. So an ice-going engineer exercises valves that a deep-sea engineer might touch once a career. That is the job. Turning things that nobody else turns. The fuel that has to stay liquid. Here is something a lot of people do not realize. Diesel does not simply get colder in the cold, it changes state. There are 3 temperatures that matter, and every engineer working ice knows all 3 by heart. Cloud point is where wax crystals first become visible, and the fuel goes hazy, which is your early warning. Cold filter plugging point is the lowest temperature at which the fuel will still pass through a standard filter, and below it, the fuel thickens and starves the engine. Pour point is where it stops flowing at all. The working rule is to keep fuel roughly 10 degrees above its pour point, using tank heating coils, and to heat the filters themselves so wax melts before it can plug anything. Get that wrong, and it is genuinely grim. Ships have reported reaching colder regions to find fuel solidified in the tanks, and the fix is not a clever valve lineup. It is people going into the tank and shoveling wax out by hand with the help of pressurized steam. The volumes involved make you understand why nobody wants that phone call. When Arctia's icebreaker Kontio sails from Helsinki for the Bay of Bothnia at the start of a season, her tanks are filled with 1.1 million liters of low-sulfur diesel and 220,000 liters of fresh water. That is the whole season's margin sitting in the double bottom, and its temperature is somebody's daily responsibility. Most veteran chief engineers will tell you plainly that the bunkering decision made alongside in port is the one that either saves or ruins the entire winter. The redundancy that makes one failure survivable. Almost every serious icebreaker in the world is diesel-electric, and the reason is human before it is technical. On the Canadian Coast Guard's Louis Saint Laurent, 5 diesel engines feed 3 propulsion motors, and critically, Not one of those 5 is dedicated to a particular shaft. Any diesel can send power to any shaft. She runs at around 15,000 horsepower most of the time, with boosts to 25,000 in heavy ice. On the American Icebreaker Healy, 4 main engines drive generators, which feed the motors, which turn the shafts, and the Coast Guard's own explanation of why is that the arrangement protects the engines from the violent variations in shaft speed that come with ice work. Translate that out of engineering and into life. It means an engine down is a bad day, not the end of a season. It means the chief can take a unit off the board, open it up, and keep the ship working. There is torque headroom built in, too. On the Finnish icebreaker Otso, the propulsion motors can deliver 130% of rated torque at low speeds, purely to stop the propellers jamming when they meet something they cannot chew. Any engineer who has done a full Baltic season will tell you that redundancy is not about the ship. It is about being able to sleep. The small things that make a season in the ice survivable, and this is where it gets human, because the machinery is only half of it. The single most effective piece of cold weather equipment on a Finnish icebreaker is not a valve or a heater, it is the sauna. The Finnish icebreaker Nordica carries 2 gyms and 2 saunas, both off limits in bad weather, and crew have been photographed sitting in one straight off a shift. 12 hours of noise and cold, then 20 minutes of heat, and you are a person again. Then there is the coffee, which is not a joke on these ships. Breakfast on Nordica starts at 6:30 with eggs, beans, mushrooms, bacon, cold cuts, cereal, porridge, yogurt, and fruit, and the crew get through up to 8 large vats of coffee a day. That figure tells you more about watch keeping in ice than any statistic about hull thickness. The clothing is its own small ritual. One working mariner's description of dressing for a winter watch is a wool watch cap under the hard hat, insulated water-resistant hooded overalls for anything outside, steel-toed boots and lined work gloves over base layers that never come off. The boots have removable liners, which get pulled out and dried every single time, because wet liners at minus 40 degrees Celsius are not an inconvenience, they are an injury. Inside, there is the lashing habit, nothing loose on any horizontal surface anywhere, mugs upside down, tools back in the box the moment you are done, spares strapped, because the ship is going to hit something, and it is going to hit it soon. And there is the ritual that has not changed in 100 years, which is rounds. Walking the plant, hand on a bearing housing, listening to a machine you know by ear, then back up to the control room where the chief watches the sensors and writes it all in the log. The cabins themselves are small and functional, a desk, a television, an ensuite. What has actually changed is the connection. Wi-Fi and personal screens mean crews now video call home daily instead of once every few weeks, which is a real gain. The quieter side effect, and the crews notice it, is that people stay in their cabins now instead of sitting in the mess together. Something was gained and something was lost. Worth a moment of history here. The Louis Saint Laurent entered service in 1969 as a steamship, and her original steam turbine propulsion was replaced with diesel-electric in the refit that finished in 1993. But the banks of computers controlling her engines and drive systems were state-of-the-art in the 1960s, and they were still in use decades later. An engineer on that ship was maintaining 3 different eras of technology at once. Now look, this would not be a Life at Sea video if we were not completely straight with you about both sides. When these systems fail, they fail hard, and they fail far from anywhere. On the American icebreaker Polar Star's 2019 Antarctic deployment, an electrical system began to smoke and damage switchboard wiring. One of the ship's 2 water evaporators failed, and the impact of ice operations ruptured the centerline shaft seal and flooded the ship. The engineers put on dry suits and divers' gloves to work in freezing bilge water and repaired the seal from inside the hull. The year before, a main gas turbine failed on January 11th, and on January 16th, the shaft seal went and flooded the engine room at roughly 20 gallons a minute until the crew got an emergency seal in place. And it is not one unlucky ship. The Healy had an engineering space fire near Banks Island in July 2024 that disabled a propulsion motor 4 years after a 2020 engine room fire damaged the starboard motor and shaft. Last July, she suffered another significant engineering casualty and had to be towed home to Seattle for major repairs. Senior Coast Guard leadership has been openly honest that much of the machinery aboard these ships is antiquated and that for some systems the parts simply do not exist anymore. Then there is what the job does to a person. The noise never stops. The motion never stops. Sleep comes in fragments between rams, and the isolation is real and measurable. The mission to seafarers. Happiness Index. For the first quarter of 2026, put overall seafarer happiness at 7.18 out of 10, down from 7.26. The positives clustered around professional pride and financial security. The negatives were isolation, poor leadership, lack of shore leave, and the strain of long separation from family. And here is the detail that should stop anyone who thinks technology solved this. Connectivity scores actually declined despite continued industry investment. Better internet has not fixed loneliness. The rotations do a lot of the work of making it bearable, and they vary enormously. Contio runs a crew of 20 on a cycle of 20 days and 10 days off, with the ship working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Canadian Coast Guard crews on the St. Lawrence rotate every 28 days. Polar Star sails for Antarctica with around 150 people for deployments of well over 100 days. Baltic Fairway work, Canadian River, and Arctic work, and an Antarctic deployment are 3 genuinely different lives, and anyone who has done 2 of them will tell you they are not comparable jobs. Where all of this is heading. The real story in polar icebreaking right now is age. Polar Star was commissioned in 1976. The Louis Saint Laurent has been in service since 1969 and is scheduled for decommissioning in 2030, with Terry Fox to follow in 2032. Engineers have been keeping ships alive well past their design lives, and everyone involved knows it. That is finally changing. The United States Coast Guard finalized contracts in July for 6 Arctic security cutters, 4 with Bollinger Shipyards in Louisiana at around $2.2 billion, and 2 with Rama Marine Constructions in Finland at around $1.1 billion, with the first delivery scheduled for 2028, alongside a $3.5 billion contract with Davie Defense for 5 more, bringing the program to 11 vessels. Canada's new flagship, the Canadian Coast Guard ship John Diefenbaker, is a Polar Class 2 design targeted for commissioning in December 2029. And underpinning it is the Ice Pact, a trilateral agreement between the United States, Canada, and Finland to pool icebreaker expertise, resources, and shipbuilding capacity. For the engineer, the trend is fewer people and more systems each. Arctia S. Polaris is engineered for a 50-year service life and run by a crew of 16 with serious Arctic experience against Contio S-20. The defenses are improving too, with air lubrication systems driven by compressors of 1.1 megawatts of combined output, laying a curtain of bubbles along the hull to cut ice friction over low friction, inerta 160 epoxy on bow plating more than 30 millimeters thick, Experienced ice-going engineers will tell you the same thing about all of it, though. New ships still get old, and the sea chest still fills with slush. So here is what I keep coming back to. The hostile thing out there is not really the ice. The ice is just weather. The hostile thing is the gradient. A machine that has to stay hot inside a world that is patiently trying to freeze it, with nothing between the two but steel and habit, and one person walking rounds at 4 in the morning with a hand on a bearing housing, listening. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Life at Sea for a lot more content just like this. And if you have ever worked an engine room, done a winter season in ice, or known someone who did, drop it in the comments below. I would genuinely love to hear it. Thanks for watching.